The State Department issued an urgent warning overnight telling all Americans in Iraq to leave the country immediately.
The U.S. and Iran may be on the verge of a major military conflict.
Escalating tensions between the U.S. and Iran are raising fears of conflict in the Middle East.
And now we're not just dealing with another country. We're dealing with a very sophisticated, modern country with a huge military and an internationally organized terrorist network.
And I think there will be midterm and long-term consequences inside Iraq after this attack. I think various Shiite forces who had differences on various matters will unite against finally expelling U.S. forces from Iraq.
This is a whole nother reality now that we're facing, a much more organized threat. And we have to be prepared, and that's why the NYPD is on high alert to protect New Yorkers and to protect those symbols of America that are the places most likely you might see an attack by an Iranian proxy.
Clashes at the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad as angry protesters break into the compound. The U.S. ambassador and other staff evacuated as U.S. forces fired tear gas at the crowd. The embassy attack, retaliation for a deadly U.S. airstrike on Sunday that killed 25 Shiite fighters near the Iraqi-Syrian border.
This embassy has been proved to be an embassy that plots against Iraq, an embassy that spies on Iraq, and an embassy that carries out sabotage in Iraq. This embassy is the place of supporting the American joker.
The airstrikes targeted Kataib Hezbollah, a Shiite militia backed by Iran, but which operates under the umbrella of the Popular Mobilization Forces. The state-sanctioned cluster of militias helps the Iraqi government fight against jihadist groups. Iraqi Prime Minister Abdul Mahdi said he was warned of the strikes only 30 minutes in advance and unsuccessfully urged the Pentagon to call them off. The Iraqi government has since condemned the attack as a violation of its sovereignty and said it would reconsider its relationship with the U.S.-led coalition. The airstrikes mark the latest escalation in the growing conflict between the U.S. and Iran. Washington called them retaliation for a recent rocket attack, which it blames on Kataib Hezbollah, that killed an American contractor. The group has denied responsibility for the attack and vowed to hit back at the U.S. to avenge its fallen fighters.
This is where a U.S. military strike took out Qassem Soleimani, the leader of Iran's elite Quds force. Soleimani oversaw the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' foreign military operations, supporting U.S.-designated terror groups in Lebanon, propping up the Assad regime in Syria, and spreading Iranian military influence in Iraq.
As we come on the air tonight, President Trump is vowing he's not backing down, and Iran is vowing it will get revenge after the president ordered drone strikes that took out Iran's top general, Qassem Soleimani. The two countries have been enemies for more than 4 decades, but rarely have tensions been as high as they are tonight.
This guy is regarded in Iran as a completely heroic figure, personally very brave. Bigger than any, put it this way, other than the supreme leader Khamenei and maybe the president, he looms larger in Iran than almost any other figure. He's regarded as personally incredibly brave. The troops love him, and he has been the kind of mastermind of Iran's policies in Syria, in Iraq.
He was the second most powerful man in Iran. No military commander, no politician had the power that he had.
The world is now waiting to see whether Iran will retaliate, with its leaders threatening a crushing response.
We are very likely looking at is a series of tit-for-tat escalations and asymmetric strikes that probably won't be limited to Iraq or to the Middle East.
We took action last night to stop a war. We did not take action to start a war.
President Trump says Soleimani was actively planning new attacks on Americans in the region, but the White House is not providing any details. Tonight, U.S. civilians are being told to leave Iraq immediately, and more American troops, thousands of them, are being sent into the region.
Soleimani was plotting imminent and sinister attacks on American diplomats and military personnel, but we caught him in the act and terminated him.
But Mr. Trump also said Soleimani had been committing acts of terror for decades.
For years, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and its ruthless Quds Force under Soleimani's leadership has targeted, injured, and murdered hundreds of American civilians and servicemen.
The death of Qassem Soleimani in Baghdad ignited a new chapter of regional tensions. Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei took to Twitter vowing severe revenge. This morning, Iran-backed Hezbollah in Lebanon ordered its, quote, resistance fighters around the world to avenge Soleimani. Iraq's prime minister says the assassinations are a massive breach of sovereignty, and the security agreement with the United States now needs reevaluation. American allies in the region, like Israel, are preparing for possible retaliation and are on high alert. So are American forces, with 9,000 in the region and 3,000 extra preparing to deploy. Hours before the killings, U.S. troops from the 82nd Airborne Division arrived in Kuwait.
Soleimani is a polarizing figure here in Iraq. His death exposes deep divisions on the country's streets.
In Baghdad's Tahrir Square, anti-government protesters celebrated the news of his death, accusing Soleimani of being behind the deaths of many demonstrators in recent months. The question now isn't whether Iran will strike back, but rather how and to what severity. And when it's over, will the killing of Soleimani have been worth it?
Well, as you said, Whit, saying that they took action to stop a war, not start a war, it is still very unclear what kind of response Iran will have. But what is clear is they will likely have some sort of response, and it could be a violent response. We have already heard the State Department tell all Americans in Iraq to immediately leave the country, and we are sending in 3,500 additional troops. We have already sent in close to 1,000 troops in the last week. So we are building up a presence there. It is very unclear whether this could or might lead to war.
This was very straightforward. He did say this is something that should have been done long ago, and I think you see in that almost caution, if you can use that word with President Trump, how tense, how delicate, how fragile and dangerous this moment is. And it is in part because with this attack and other things, President Trump is breaking the rules. He's changing the rules of the game in the Middle East. Maybe for better, maybe for worse, that remains to be seen. But right now, waiting on the Iranian response, there is a question because it hasn't happened before.
No specific threat has been identified, but U.S. law enforcement officials have long believed and have evidence that Iran does have capabilities inside the United States. For example, in 2018, 2 Iranians were charged with being operatives of that government, doing surveillance inside the United States. And just 3 months ago, in September, a New Jersey man was charged with being connected with Hezbollah, of doing surveillance inside the United States. Specifically in New York, looking at the Statue of Liberty, the World Trade Center, the Times Square area, places like that, of doing surveillance. He was known as a bomb maker with training from Hezbollah as well. So they know that Iran has capability inside the United States. So that is why you see a level of concern about Iran. Also, you mentioned cyber. Iran has been involved in a number of cyber attacks inside the United States, according to U.S. officials, including attacks on financial institutions and even infrastructure. So this is something that the United States officials believe there's potential for concern for, so they're urging vigilance.
Step back. What's been going on is that the United States, the Trump administration has decided it is going to pursue a policy of maximum pressure on Iran, getting out of the Iran deal, calling the Revolutionary Guard a terrorist organization, essentially making it impossible for Iran to sell oil anywhere. The Iranians, therefore, feel trapped in a box and have been lashing out in various ways. They've shot down drones, they've attacked Saudi oil facilities. Now this. The Iranians have been, as you know, attacking American contractors and killed some. So right now we are in a situation where the Trump administration has ratcheted up the pressure. It's not clear what they want, what the goal of this is, because the demands they have made of Iran are so extravagant. They're sort of essentially that Iran surrender, its role in the region, and perhaps even essentially engage in a regime change. That's not going to happen. So the problem with the administration strategy right now is, where does it go? Because the Iranians won't stop. They have many levers. They have militias in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq. They could destabilize the Iraqi government in a way that would make the United States even more vulnerable.
Iran is obviously through a vacuum, have become incredibly powerful within Iraq.
Right. Iraq. The important thing to remember is Iraq is a Shia majority country. Iran is its next door neighbor, also Shia. Iran has enormous power, but the United States is also a big stakeholder in Iraq. I mean, the American embassy in Iraq, people have to understand, it's not a normal embassy. It's, I think, 100 acres. It's like a mini city. And for that embassy to have been stormed, it's actually much bigger in some ways than the storming of the Iranian embassy. Obviously, it wasn't successful, but my point is, the American embassy in Baghdad is the symbol of American power.
Yeah.
For that to have been in some way attacked, it's a big. We've suddenly ratcheted up the pressure here, and it's not clear where this is going.
In America, we're facing a different kind of vulnerability. We know they've made plans previously. We don't know the extent of those plans, obviously. We don't know what they are able to activate. But if this turns into a full-scale shooting war, and right now that's the direction it's going in, we would be fools to assume that this doesn't end up with multiple acts of terror here in the United States eventually, not in the first round of activity. I very much believe the first things you'll see will not be here. But this is not something that we resolve in weeks. I want to absolutely part company with the president when he said if there was a war, it would be a short war. I think it's the exact opposite way around. If there's a war with Iran, it's going to be a very long war, and not a conventional war, but a war in which Iranian proxy forces all over the world attack American assets, American personnel, and the American homeland. And this is why we should stop this march to war, and there should be actual congressional deliberations to decide if this is going to make us safer or less safe.
Earlier, dozens of Iranian lawmakers chanted "Death to America" as they met in Parliament.
You know, one of the things that we've heard pretty much from all levels of politics here in Iran and from the military as well is that Iran is going to retaliate. There will be a response and there will be revenge. We heard that from Iran's supreme leader, from Iran's president as well. So I spoke to the main military advisor of Iran's supreme leader, someone who's extremely high in the hierarchy and very close to the power center of this country. And I asked Hossein Degan, what exactly is the response going to be? And he said there will be a response that will be a military response, and it will be against military targets, but that Iran does not want a wider war with the United States. Let's listen in.
پاسخ حتما پاسخ نظامی خواهد بود.
The response for sure will be military and against military sites. Let me tell you one thing. Our leadership has officially announced that we've never been seeking war and we will not be seeking war. It was America that has started the war. Therefore, they should accept appropriate reactions to their actions. The only thing that can end this period of war is for the Americans to receive a blow that is equal to the blow they've inflicted. Afterwards, they should not seek a new cycle.
Certainly, the two things that we gleaned from that interview that seemed extremely important is that they say they are going to use their military to respond and they are going to hit military targets. It's unclear, of course, where those military targets would be in this region. And one of the things that we've heard from the Defense Department, from the Trump administration, is that the U.S. in the region here is definitely hardening its defenses for something like a response from the Iranians, which of course the U.S. says it's expecting sooner rather than later, Victor.
President Trump giving a bold warning to Iran, saying if the nation retaliates, the U.S. is ready to strike Iranian targets fast and hard.
Good morning, Whit. You know, the rest of the world may be calling for de-escalation, but President Trump appears to be determined to go for deterrence instead. Even at the risk of inflaming things even more, he has been tweeting taunts and threats at Iran, bragging about American military hardware and saying if they attack us again, we will hit them harder than they have ever been hit before. Overnight, President Trump ratcheted up the threats to Iran, warning them not to retaliate for the killing of Qassem Soleimani. Let this serve as a warning, he tweeted, that if Iran strikes any Americans or American assets, we have targeted 52 Iranian sites, some at a very high level and important to Iran and the Iranian culture. He made it clear that number 52 reflects the 52 Americans held hostage in Iran after the 1979 revolution. We say no more! That bellicose rhetoric, even as U.S. cities from coast to coast saw scattered protests this weekend. Resist! People concerned Trump has brought us to the brink of another costly war.
We've been there, we've done that, it didn't work, we've created terrorists, we've created ISIS, we need to stop.
آتش به اختیار هدیه خواهیم داد به کسی که سر دستور دهنده قتل و ترور بزرگمرد این انقلاب رو برای ما رقم زد. هر کس سر مردک موزرد دیوانه رو برای ما بیاره 80 میلیون دلار از طرف ملت بزرگ ایران آتش به اختیار بهش هدیه خواهیم داد. اگر موافقید با تکبیر موافقتتون اعلام کنید.